Cabernet is a narrative-driven RPG set in an Eastern European-inspired fantasy world inhabited by vampires and other magical beings from Slavic folklore. The player's goal is to survive through to the end of the story while investigating the secrets of underworld society. Liza, a young 19th century doctor, awakens alone in a cellar with no memory of where she is or how she got there. She emerges into a party held by the Higher Society, a clique of vampires that secretly runs the city, and soon deduces that she's been inducted into their ranks. Adjusting to her new existence as the living dead and learning the rules of the local hierarchy would all be hard enough were it not for the strange supernatural entity that's stalking her around the night. All of this is tied into the mystery of Liza's own death, the memories of which are only slowly returning to her. The mechanics of Cabernet are built entirely around its story, setting, and especially characters. Liza possesses many of the gifts traditionally attributed to vampires, including shape-shifting, hypnosis, and invisibility, along with vulnerability to sunlight and restrictions on entering buildings uninvited. As a woman of letters, she also has access to more worldly knowledge, and all of these talents offer different avenues by which she can complete her quests. Liza also needs to feed on a regular basis to survive, and this fuels the game's morality system. Many actions affect Liza's disposition, either preserving her humanity or pushing her deeper into a nihilistic urge to survive at all costs. But even a player striving to maintain Liza's humanity is going to have to attack a human at some point, and feeding on random humans isn't an option. Liza can only bite someone with whom she has a trusting relationship, risking their death every time. This essential cruelty plays into the story of Cabernet, which leans heavily into the depictions of vampires as an aristocracy of the night. The higher society serve as an analogy for the gentry class of the late colonial period, with the humans standing in place of the serfs. Most of the side quests have Liza meddling in the sad affairs of individual humans, either for her own benefit and amusement, or in the benign role of a humanitarian, but either way, it's clear that she's doing so as a person in a position of superiority. And ultimately, the player gets to choose who gets a happy ending and who continues to spiral down into despair. Overall, Cabernet offers a fresh take on a traditional vampire story, and fans of traditional horror and dark fiction will likely find something to appreciate here. Dark Pact is a console-style TRPG with a heavy focus on character positioning. The displacement mechanics give it a distinctive puzzle game flavor that sets it apart from other throwback RPGs. The sorceress Liesel is the scion of a noble family that was long ago disgraced by its association with the dark arts. Forced to make a living as a soldier of fortune, she and her underlings receive an enticing offer. A nearby kingdom has been threatened by a dragon, and the king is requesting Liesel's assistance in retrieving and delivering the treasure to be used as ransom. In exchange, she'll be restored to her old social position. But there's more to the situation than a simple adventure, and Liesel soon learns that dark forces are manipulating the situation for reasons unknown. The player controls a party of 4 characters who are accompanied by a collection of computer-controlled allies, including soldiers as well as non-combatants who lack even the survival instincts to move out of harm's way. Party members don't gain levels or experience, though they do unlock new skills at story-appropriate moments. In general, the goal in each stage is to survive for a set period of time without incurring any friendly deaths, though a handful of levels mix this up. The key combat mechanics are all built around positioning and displacement. Nearly every move used by the party will push, pull, lure, or otherwise move one or more targets. This can be used to bait enemies into attacking each other a la Into the Breach, but the tight survival requirements mean that just as often you'll be using these skills to push vulnerable non-combatants out of harm's way. This leads to some tricky tactics, as you may occasionally have to intentionally attack and injure an ally to move them out of an enemy's line of attack. The defensive-oriented nature of Dark Pact's levels mean that while the game may resemble something like Fire Emblem or Shining Force on the surface, it plays more like a hybrid of one of those titles with a puzzle game. The good news is that the encounter design is loose enough that there are usually many possible solutions, so you're not trying to guess what the developers want you to do. Overall, Dark Pact definitely has a different feel than your typical TRPG, but it should appeal to the same audience and is worth a try if you're comfortable with something a little bit outside of the norm. Cauldron is an incremental game built around minigames. This offers a fair amount of variety, with particular appeal for anyone interested in a more easygoing experience. The gameplay of Cauldron centers primarily around a simple RPG. The long-term goal is to push back layers of darkness covering the map, with each square protected by monsters. The combat system is turn-based with staggered turns, as with most modern JRPGs. There's a heavy emphasis on status conditions, with stacking up bad statuses being necessary to finish some of the harder fights. Clearing darkness will eventually unlock new party members, of which the player can take as many as 8 into combat. Each party member is built around a narrow gimmick, such as single target damage, area effect damage, specific status conditions, or defense, with a special attack and super attack that are themed around that. Each character has a unique set of upgrades with just enough variety to allow for multiple builds, but the overall design is very simple, allowing for characters to be swapped in and out based on the demands of specific enemy combinations. Between fights, the player can gather resources, 3 initially, with 2 more showing up later in the game. There are many games to collect these resources, which range from item drops to mining to auto shooters. Gathered resources are used primarily to level up the party, but there's also an upgrade tree for each minigame that helps get higher scores while also boosting the rate at which resources can be passively gathered. Almost the entire game can be idle. The player auto-harvests resources at regular intervals, with the amounts increasing based on performance in the minigames and the proportion of the game cleared. Combat can also be run on full auto. Each character has their own adjustable AI, though the auto-combat system is rudimentary, and even some relatively easy fights can be too technical for the computer to manage. Overall, Cauldron definitely has more gameplay depth than your typical incremental game or idler, but don't expect a full RPG experience out of it. Grifford Academy is a turn-based RPG with highly streamlined mechanics. It's designed for less experienced players, but there's also plenty of challenge for anyone who wants to test their RPG skills. Grifford Academy is an ordinary school housing a strange secret. Within the library are books that write and unwrite themselves, telling the story of Cauldron, a kingdom that never existed. Erica, a student at the academy, finds one of these books and is pulled into the land of Cauldron along with her brother and several classmates. Now trapped in a world overrun with aggressive monsters, she must find her brother and get to the bottom of Cauldron's woes. Combat in Grifford Academy is turn-based with staggered turns, similar to active time battle but without the fight constantly advancing. Each party member carries 4 pieces of equipment, with each item corresponding to a combat action. The first slot is always reserved for a character-specific piece of equipment that scales to the party's level, but the other 3 are unrestricted and the player can always sell gear for 100% of the purchase price. Characters are slightly specialized in certain types of equipment, but there's still a lot of room for customization. Outside of combat, the gameplay is greatly simplified and streamlined. There's no free overworld exploration. Combat areas are purely combat, while towns contain only areas of interest. Grifford Academy is also a grind-free experience, with the party leveling up at key story moments. The simplification of the gameplay combined with the story and aesthetics may lead you to believe that this is a game for beginners, and by default, this is true. However, set the game to strategy mode, the elevated difficulty level, and it becomes a far more challenging experience. Winning fights in strategy mode demands a more careful approach, managing status conditions and cooldowns, and even adjusting equipment to counteract more difficult enemy arrangements. Overall, Grifford Academy is a solid RPG experience that can appeal to neophytes and experts alike. SPELLHACK is a strategy deck builder with some tower defense mechanics and an aesthetic inspired by computer games of the late 80s. The core gameplay, while it has some similarities to other titles, is just far enough removed from genre standards to break it out from the pack. The game is divided into day and night phases. The day is reserved for deck building and preparing defenses for the evening attack. The player has a limited amount of time to explore different areas of the city for new spells, upgrades, side quests, and temporary enhancements. Advancing through the story gradually unlocks new areas, and scanning those areas reveals additional information. The daytime portion offers a little bit more control over deck design than most deck builders offer. While the events are still random, each location features a predetermined set of possible events and the player gets a few choices along the way. It doesn't guarantee that anyone can get a specific build, but it does feel less frustrating when you can angle for events that, for example, specifically remove or upgrade cards. During the night, the player must protect a portal from waves of summoned monsters, using spells to damage enemies or deploy walls to slow them down. Gameplay is semi-real time. Turns come at regular intervals, with the player getting a fresh hand and renewed energy about every 15 seconds. Enemies have various innate traits, though aside from the ones that move around the field when damaged or temporarily become invincible, they don't have a huge impact. The controls and interface are simple, and there's not too much to figure out here. Energy is the major limiting factor. Most spells are relatively costly, and some require a non-renewing resource that must be gained from destroying certain enemies. Energy management ends up being the bulk of the tactical consideration, as most viable builds pretty much play themselves. Combat is won between fights, with quick decision-making tipping the scales once the fight starts. Overall, SPELLHACK is an interesting variation on the deck builder formula that might be a little too different for some, but if you're willing to deal with a slight learning curve, it has a lot to offer. Seed of Pandora is a throwback JRPG, one of many in a recent revival of 16-bit styled role-playing games. It takes a pretty straightforward approach to that style, aiming to recreate the gameplay of that era. Bastien is a youth living on a farm in the kingdom of Garda, a realm built around the legendary Gaia tree from which all life springs. Recently, Bastien has been haunted by a recurring dream, a vision of a strange world outside of Garda, and the voice of a woman calling his name and beseeching him for help. But there are clues suggesting that these are more than mere dreams, and Bastien soon finds himself in a quest that concerns his own connection to an ancient banished order that has put the world in jeopardy. Mechanically, Seed of Pandora is a turn-based RPG that bears a lot of similarities to other recent throwback games. Aside from the standard RPG actions, most characters possess two sets of skills. Psi, which consumes a non-renewing resource and is mainly for healing, and Techniques, combat skills drawing on a different resource that increases as characters inflict and receive damage. As regular attacks are generally ineffective, managing that second resource is necessary to ending even standard fights in a reasonable amount of time. One small divergence from the usual JRPG of the time is a lack of random encounters in dungeons. While the party is still subject to random attacks in the overworld, enemies are visible inside closed areas, and the party can generally avoid them with a little bit of caution. This is recommended as encounters can be a bit protracted even with good strategy. All of this is pretty standard, which is a good way to describe Seed of Pandora in general. The overall execution is competent to good, but there aren't a lot of risks taken in either the mechanics or the narrative. It's simply a recreation of an older style of game. Hardcore fans of 90s RPGs may still enjoy the experience, but if you're looking for something novel, you're unlikely to find it here.